Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our next webinar, Lessons Learned from China, the Global Impact of COVID-19 on Supply Chain Management. First of all, I'd like to go over a few technicalities. For the questions and answer sessions, we would like to ask you to use the Zoom group chat for any questions. We'll try to cover most of the answers after each presentation, but in case that this is not possible, we'll try to answer them after the session. Also, please be advised that this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording upon conclusion of the event. At this point, we're also trying to incorporate a little bit of networking into our seminar, just as if it were an actual presential event. So therefore, we would like to ask you to all turn on your video and introduce yourself in the Zoom group chat. We will have 15 minutes after this session to have a little bit of interaction, and you can use the Zoom group chat for that. It's possible to send private messages through there, so you can exchange information and get in touch with each other that way. We also had already a little bit of a session before the start of the webinar, so if you're joining us next time, you can also be here a little bit earlier so you can speak with the people in the room. So looking at the agenda, which you also all received by email, we will start with Ben Botekoper, who's joining us today from China, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what has been the lessons learned in China. Then we'll have an expert panel with three of our members from the chamber. We will have Ana Cecilia Haro from Action Trade, Enrique de la Vega from Bookie Logistics, and Chef Mink from Royal Rotra. And the moderator will be Jamil Sarsar from Control Union. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to Ben Botekoper. Ben?
Thank you, Karin. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to share our lessons learned here in China from an evening perspective here in Guangzhou. There's a big time difference, but I'm happy to be here. So thank you for the invite. I will share my screen to introduce the PPT. It's there. Everyone is probably seeing it, so I think so. So I will go off. Now, as you know, China is maybe a little bit more upfront of the other countries in the whole process of dealing with the coronavirus. There are many lessons to be learned. Of course, every country is different, so there's other economies and there's other people. So I will just show a little bit from China perspective, things that might work here. It doesn't mean that they work in other countries, but take from it what you can. Here. I'll first introduce myself. My name is Ben Botekoper from CL China Import Leads. We are a supply chain management company. We help companies with their supply chain here in China. So that means actually any work related to purchasing orders, development of new products, sourcing, key quality control. Everything you can do or you need to do here regarding your supply chain, we can help with. We do this based on service-based, so we're not a trading company in between. That makes that we add a lot of value to where the entrepreneur doesn't come further. We can always add value in finding solutions and getting profitable management where things mostly also go wrong. We make it profitable. So we do this from Guangzhou. That's also the location where I'm now calling from. So that's what we are. China and COVID. I will try to keep it short, but so much have happened. So forgive me at the moment. It's a little bit of a chaos because you want to mention everything because if you don't mention something, you maybe missed something important. So forgive me if it is a little bit chaos. I try to keep it very strict and as an overview. So I hope it will be also like that interpreted. So let's start with just a timeline from the moment of the lockdown. So before the lockdown, I will just keep that a little bit away. The spread of the COVID, of the coronavirus, have increased here very much because of the Chinese New Year period. Here, hundreds of millions of people return back to their hometowns to stay with their families. And in general, that means that really stuffed trains, buses, cars fully full. In 1.5 weeks, hundreds of millions of people traveled back to their hometown. So this was very easy for Corona to spread. But it was not really an impact on supply chain. So not yet. Why? Because the Chinese New Year period is always an impact on the supply chain. All the manufacturing and industries will close their doors for a while. It's a national holiday. So it's the longest period in a year that all the companies close and are really closed. So not a small team that works, no, really closed. So it is always kind of a lockdown. So really, from the moment that I want to start is from the lockdown itself, which was actually an extension of the Chinese New Year national holiday. The date that companies could start up again. This varied from a week to 2 weeks, depending on the location, because some places had more infections and were needed more attention, and some places could be earlier started up. Later on, there was a phasal startup, so where the operations could be started up again. They tried under measures to start up again. Start companies up again. Office work started to go up, well, from home, but we will see that later. Then after that, a second phase, the ease of restrictions. So where you resumed operations under restrictions, they eased the restrictions where it was possible to ramp up a little bit of operations. And then at the end, in the fourth period, which is now, and also a little bit the forecast, everything is under control. And how it is under control mostly is just based on data and AI and really location bonded. So that are the four sections that I want to discuss. And here a little bit more detail from time to time. So in the first part, it was really clear. As I said, everything was in lockdown. So that means no normal business, no manufacturing, no movement of people. Only the key sectors after the Chinese New Year period were allowed to resume operations again, because they had to move on. Especially there was also a big lack of medical equipment and medical protective materials. So there was a lot of focus on getting factories, medical factories running again. But also logistics needed to be ramped up again to make sure that there's enough supplies to at least survive, but also to distribute these medical equipments. And of course, the food industry. Eventually, that was the key sectors, like in any other country actually, which could be resumed already. So what was a thing for the supply chain in general was for the medical industry and the key sectors at that time was already a problem that all those people were in their hometowns, because hundreds of millions of people went back with Chinese New Year to their hometowns. They didn't travel back because there was no movement of people allowed. So they did this a lot with local staff, and if needed, they could get people around the area still with permission of the government to get them working there. So what did the government in China do in this period? They used this period to really get in control of the virus, and not really on the virus, but more about the knowledge in spreading. So there was a big assignment for actually a lot of Chinese companies, software companies and initiatives to get apps or apps running that could monitor and register health details, but also monitor people and to just get some research about where those clusters are, where those infections were the highest, but also to make sure that you could track down the people who have been in contact with someone who was infected. So everyone was obliged to say, like, okay, you need to register in this app, and you need to also register your health details. So if you had a cough or whatsoever, you also needed to update these details. There was then also an app created, mostly local, because measurements are differing per location. In general, the central government have a central policy. However, the interpretation of this policy in general is per city and municipality can differ. So in general, a lot of cities, they developed additional applications where you had a QR. There was a problem of supply, but there was also a problem of supply worldwide. All supply chains were disrupted. So they needed to start up the economy again. Now, very clear and actually very recognizable examples. Working from home was introduced. Per city and local municipality was a different policy. I will go later on that, how that influenced factories, for example. And actually to start up, eventually there was a requirement, or companies could eventually make sure that their workers, that they knew exactly where they would have been. So you could have with GPS data, you could apply to see, okay, have my worker been in a area where a lot of infections were, especially with Hubei. So in this case, there were a lot of possibilities for employers when they started up, that they could check from their workers if they would be a risk for the rest of their of the company. There were all kinds of policies in place to make sure that you can control start up your operations again. One of those things, at the moment you see it from a manufacturing perspective, was that there were very controlled in and outgoing from goods and people. So that means you had entry and exits with temperature checks, but also a registry of people going in and out. But also there were no QCs or auditors allowed, or third parties that normally come to factories or come to your company ground, they were not allowed to come in. So even if there was a controlled startup again of a company, it was not allowed for you, if you normally would go for a QC, to go there for a QC. A QC is a quality inspection, for example, or an audit. So that were the problems based on the regulations. Beside that, there was also, it was before you could apply to start up again, there were certain measures in place, such as that you needed to have enough alcohol, hand alcohol on stock. You needed to have enough mask on stock, because you needed to create a healthy working way and working place for your employees. So if you didn't have that, or you didn't reach those standards and those requirements, you could not open. So it was really like, okay, one, you needed to have all supplies on stock, a safe working way, and eventually you needed to register everyone who went on your plant, and it could be only the people related to your company and therefore also registered as employee. Now, what was the problem? The problems which came out of that is that, based on with those regulations or measures in place, you could maybe start with 10 to 30% of your workers. On one hand, because you were not able to process, because not all the companies were already startup, but also, as I said, a lot of workers were still in the hometowns. So you needed to do it with the people who were locally or actually lived nearby and could travel to their work. Talking about manufacturing. That was a big problem, because factories could then only start up with 10 to 30%, maybe 35% if they were lucky. So sometimes there were not full production lines, were even not being able to fully fulfill with labor. So they started up, a lot of companies, they started up, but they could not start up that they were really able to produce a product, for example. What was also, this lack of labor was of course a problem, but it was not only the problem for factory A here in Guangzhou, this was a problem for all factories everywhere in China. So the problem of this was that at the moment that all factories, or there was one factory which was not open yet or could not supply yet, your whole supply chain was disrupted. So a lot of suppliers, they, for example, in these areas where the regulations were, okay, I can start up again, I have my protective materials on stock, I can maybe have one production line full with employees, okay, but my supplier of my raw materials is not open yet or don't have enough people to supply. So it was really looking for what can I do, but the disruption in general was that in this whole chain of suppliers of parts and raw materials, there was always, or in a lot of cases, always a party which was not able to deliver, and therefore you were still not able to deliver your products. So that was really in the resuming operations. Focus was, okay, control startup was a lot of regulations from the government. There were, you needed to have a lot of pre-measures taken, but small teams and also a lack of labor, which created problems for your own factory, but also problems in your whole supply chain. So after this, when things were going well, the government actually also saw that the economy or the supply chain still didn't really run. So in certain places where it was possible, they eased the restrictions. And that was actually another phase, you can see it as the second phase, where the government was actually saying like, okay, we need to get you up and running again because people need to get jobs again, you need to export again. How the supply chains need to go again. How are we going to do that? So you saw restrictions, you saw easing. So there were not like formal new regulations in place, but what they did was where in the first startup phase there was a government official to say in your factory if everything was okay. So they came to look. They needed to personally give permission to start up. Now only photos of, for example, the stock of protective materials, but also how your working way was, a movie of your working way was already enough. And that made that in the Chinese way, then things are a little bit faked sometimes. So that made it able to, under the regulations, still start up operations while you were maybe not fulfilling the full rules. So especially for your suppliers and small suppliers, this was the possibility to get supply to you, to get raw materials to you. And also in this way, also there was no monitoring of the government. So non-registered people, such as auditors, but QC people could go on the factory account again. They could enter without having a government official looking at them. So it was at some moment so needed that this phase and that the economy would proceed again. The supply chains needed to go run, but they needed people because the people were still not able to move. Now, in the second phase, it was most of the people were again able to move. However, a lot of times they had problems, for example, with transportation. Their landlords didn't accept them back in their homes, so the rooms that they rented. But also, what the thing was is they were afraid. So they were afraid to travel, afraid that they might get infected if they go by train or by buses. So what some local governments did from the labor departments, they arranged buses to pick up workers, and there were whole operations. So the government really supported to get buses to other provinces to make sure that all registered employees could come back, and that also those landlords would accept them, because yeah, if you are with a government official next to you not accepting someone who is rightfully want to rent or at least want to go rightfully back to the rented place, they could not refuse. So the government really tried to ease the restrictions where possible so that entrepreneurs could really go again and that supply chains could start up at least, and to make sure how can we get people back to the factories. Also now offices started to open again, also important, because before where everything was advised to and still advised to work from home, offices still needed to have people. So it's still better to work in teams in the opinion of many. So also here you could apply upfront if you could open with your office again or get people in your office again. So in this period, started with a little bit easing of restrictions, and eventually a little bit of people coming back to the factories, eventually increases. And eventually we were back to 40 to 70% of the old operations, the old level of operations. So yeah, actually that brought us to the situation now, where actually all supply chains are already back to not normal. There are a lot of companies, of course, bankrupt. Some companies had financial problems, but in general, all the supply chains are running again, but they are quite delayed. Why? Because there's still shortage of people, especially if you had skilled labor. There was already a limitation of skilled labor. You will never get them fully back. So what you see in the supply chains is that supply chains are running, but that they have delayed lead times. So delayed delivery times in general. So that makes that still the supply chains are running, but it's not cannot supply in the way that you would like, and it would not influence your own business. So based on this phasal startup, they try per location now to open up again. Maybe some have noticed that Wuhan, the epic center of this virus, is opened. I think now people can travel out again. So it is really location binded, where people are sometimes still in lockup, but in general they try to scale up the economy again by just easing restrictions and see how it goes. Now, what happened in this period is, of course, that the worldwide demand have fallen. So the worldwide demand fell, of course, with the further outbreak in Europe, but now also on your side in South America or Mid America. So in general, this also actually caused a second wave of bankruptcy of a lot of companies in the supply chain. So also there was a disruption. If you sometimes it could be that your supplier suddenly is bankrupt or start to do other products. So now a lot of companies started to make masks because where you make before LED lighting, for example, that is no business anymore, and there are a lot of power bank factories, all kind of products which are not really having demand at the moment. They started to, for example, look for other products, and at the moment medical equipment is of course very in demand. So the supply chains should still change because the circumstances are still not optimal to make profits. China heavily depends on the worldwide economy, but possesses the full supply chain. So where worldwide the supply chain is disrupted, if you are an importer outside of China, that means you get influenced by the lock on China and also some other issues. Well, China itself contains the whole supply chain mostly of most of the products. So they have from the raw material till eventually the end assembler of the product. It's all existing in China. So the disruption of the supply chain worldwide is now not because China cannot deliver anymore, cannot produce anymore. It is especially because of other issues that you have worldwide, is that the demand for certain products is very high. Maybe your supplier have been bankrupt or is not able to, or has problems to deliver. Of course, production time and lead times are delayed. But there's also another thing which is at the moment really a problem in the supply chain worldwide, is the international logistics. So due to all the passenger flights that have been cancelled and all the scheduled flights that have been cancelled, there is really a big capacity that fell away out of the air freight logistics, which causes that now delivery or shipping times by airplane are sometimes way longer than you expected a few weeks ago. That is on one hand is because of the less airplanes that are flying between countries, or sometimes zero airplanes that fly between countries. but beside that also the space, the capacity which is available is then taken by medical supplies, as medical supplies are the product and everyone need it in high volumes. So this disrupts also the supply chain in general, and it makes it very fragile to do business if you're depending on that. So what is the impact of the Corona crisis in China? So what have been the impact? In general, as a Bencham, I'm board member of the Bencham too, and within the Bencham we have sent out a survey to collect more information about how companies have been impacted by the virus here. And you see that actually three things are now the top three problems which the Corona crisis have caused is the HR problem, what I told. So a lot of people didn't come back, didn't dare to come back, or had really issues to come back because they were in their hometowns. So that was just a practical problem. Now the supply chain disruption in any case. So if you are in a location, indeed, what I said, which still had a restriction, but your supplier was there, you had a problem. Also, of course, the logistics in general have played a role. So I think supply chain disruption and logistics is a little bit together. And of course, losing clients and orders is also good to mention, because where the demand now have fall. There are also a lot of companies who, of course, have clients in China where also demand fell before. So these things are really taken account. So what this HR problem was maybe a little bit Chinese, but there are some lessons to be learned from that. So to go to the lessons learned, there are actually a few which I want to take out. One is supply chains will disrupt in any case. So you have one, whether there's a soft lockdown or a hard lockdown, suppliers will in general close their doors during a lockdown. Everyone have experienced. But eventually also due to governmental measures that, of course, shipping is less available, especially fast shipping is less available. In any case, there is a point in your supply chain which is limited, and therefore you're not able to make or deliver your products. So your supply chain will disrupt 100%. So it's always good to check, okay, what can we learn from that? Is that you make sure that you have your supply chain as much as possible near your location, or if possible in-house. So can I make raw materials by myself? Are there things which are really vital for me to be able to deliver? Can I do that in-house? Scale down to scale up. So when the government is in control, you cannot really do more than follow the governmental measures. However, to survive, it is important that you can scale down, but also be able to to prepare for a phasal startup again. So any country will eventually, in phases, will start up the economy again. So you can prepare for that to scale up again when it is possible. In general, we know that the demand will fall. In China, all the demand have felt in the national market, in the internal market, but also now worldwide. And you see that really impacts a lot of companies. So yeah, generally taken, this is for any crisis, but especially this kind of crisis. Make sure that you have a financial buffer, and also make sure that you cut cost to make sure that you survive and that you can just go through a certain period without or a limited amount of income. And also what you have seen is that everywhere is that your business models change. So what I said, also the demand changes. So what you saw with factories, a lot of factories, they are making masks, for example, first an assignment for the government, but later on also factories who made, for example, LED lighting, who started to buy machines. The masks are maybe not medical, but there's a lot of demand for those masks, and they change their business model. So in this kind of crisis, what we can learn from China is that where demand falls, there's also a demand increasing. Especially also what you see in Holland and other cases is that you also see that, for example, toys are an increasing category because a lot of people stay home. So where demand falls, there's also demand increasing somewhere else. So changing and having an overview, okay, what can I do with my supply chain? How can I change to a certain other product sector that has demand, is also a good advice and a good lesson learned from China. Fear leads the people. In general, fear leads to people. I think for everyone it's clear. But if people don't want to travel anymore, you're gonna have problems in your HR department or in your company. But your HR department will have problems to get enough labor to get up and running again. It depends, I think, also on the social status and the welfare status of the people itself. Yeah, when people can stay home and they are afraid, they don't want to come to work. So less people available and willing to work in general. So how you're going to deal with that is also good to think about. Yeah, and international logistics is a challenge and will stay a challenge. So as those passenger flights, there were so many passenger flights in the air worldwide, and they always took a little part of this air freight. And together, that's really a lack of capacity. And what it creates is that also charter airplanes at the moment from China then are really going through the roof. Prices are going through the roof. Where I heard some examples of being before 400,000 USD, a charter airplane from Hong Kong to Las Vegas. Now that was 1.6 million. So in any case, this international logistics stays a challenge and will eventually have, even if the manufacturing is already ramped up again in China or somewhere else, is your logistics still able to deliver in a certain time and for what price? That will really stay a challenge worldwide due to the restrictions and the less availability of the capacity. So yeah, that's actually a little bit the story from China. And yeah, if there are any questions, I don't know how Karin can lead the questions maybe afterwards or now. Can you?
Thank you, Ben. We're running a little bit out of time. We have one question from the audience. If you can keep it under 2 minutes, will be great. It's from Aribel Contreras. She's asking, I argue that USMCA, which is the free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the US, shouldn't entry into force this 1st July due to the effects of the Chinese supply chain. Mexico, Canada, and the US are not ready. What is your reflection on this?
On their free trade agreement? That it should be enforced now, especially because of those supply chain disruptions?
Well, she's saying that it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be enforced.
Right now.
Yeah, I think that's more a medical question for the medical experts than for I think supply chains based on governmental measures to fight the spread of the coronavirus. So I don't think if they enforce it or don't enforce it, that is, I think, more based on the situation in how the virus spreads, instead of that business-wise, you should always enforce free trade agreements because it makes it easier, but there are a lot of other things involved. So yeah, that's my view a little bit on that. I think you can enforce where needed, but I think at this moment you really need to look with countries together. Okay, where do we have a real interest to start up new supply chains? What is the real need, and how can we make sure that we all benefit from that? That it really makes a difference in this time. I don't think a general enforcement will be relevant at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much. Ben, a really quick other question. How worried are you about a second wave?
Now, yeah, they say it's the dancing period, right? Before they say it's the hammer to get the curve down to make sure that the IC capacity is not, or is less possible pressure on the IC capacity. Yeah, there will be cases coming up again, for sure. But I think here in China and what you see in Asia is that there is a lot of monitoring. The privacy rules are a little bit different interpreted here in Asia, but they're really beneficial for being able to really track down directly some infections to make sure that you can contained infection, literally very specific in a certain area. And China is very big, so if you really are early informed, you can also early act now. And I think as long as that happens, you will have a new wave. You will have little outbreaks, of course, but I don't think a wave as we have seen will not come back. I don't think that is realistic.
Okay, well, let's hope that you're right. Ben, thank you so much for your participation. We would like to start now with the expert panel. Yemil, could you also turn on your microphone?
Yes, can you hear me, Karin?
Loud and clear, thank you, Yemil. So our expert panel of today, we have the moderator, Yemil Sarsar, who just joined us with also audio. We have Ana Cecilia Haro from Action Trade Services, Enrique de la Vega from Bookie Logistics, and Chef Minke from Rotra. They are all three experts in different fields in the logistics chain, both in Mexico and other countries. So we are eager to hear from them. Yemil?
Yeah, thank you very much, Karin, and yeah, thanks for the introduction. And you already made an introduction for all the panelists, but yeah, and actually I understand that they all made a brief introduction also in the chat, so there you can find more information about each of those companies. Actually, I will say some things about each of those. Ana Cecilia Haro, she's from Action Trade Services. She works in a company, Mexican company. They're mainly doing logistic operations and some business development. And now they are with a very interesting project now for Mexico and the Netherlands to have a short route, maritime route for fresh fruits. Probably she will tell us a little bit more about that project. And they are also opening a new offices in the Netherlands. So it will be important to understand how is that going. And well, on the other side, we have Enrique de la Vega from Bookie Logistics. They are also a logistic operation company. So we will try to understand also how they see this the situation. And in the other side, Chef Minke from Royal Rotra. Okay, also a logistic operation company with many offices all around the world, with important companies as their clients like Grupo Modelo, Jumex, Royal Rickham. So yeah, very interesting also to understand the outlook of this actual situation and what they see for the future. Okay, so let's start with the first question. And as Ben was also saying, a very interesting presentation, Ben, thank you very much. The situation in each country is very different, and here we would like to understand what do you see from the different regions. What do you think, I mean, which region do you think is struggling more with the current restrictions due to the corona contingency out of different products with transport? Which one are more affected? This is a question for everyone, so there you have 5 minutes.
Okay, who starts, Karin?
Starts Action for Karin. Sorry.
You want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Okay, well, yes, definitely developing economies face higher risk, in my opinion. I think for sure Africa, so South Asia, and no lesser extent Latin America, because we have much lower health system capacity, more exposed to the world trade cycle because they are goods and services are highly dependent, advanced economies demand, and thus more vulnerable, to the crisis, and far less access to internet. Well, a lot of things can mean here in Latin America, for example, Mexico. To have a short answers, we specialize in fresh fruits, and definitely in these 8 weeks, the exports have been less. Talking about numbers for us is more or less 30% less. Speaking with melon, lemon from United States, and mango for Europe, practically we are off, and we are waiting somehow this reactivation. That's in my case.
Thank you very much, Ana. And next we can go with Enrique. Sorry, can you all hear what is Enrique saying, or? Enrique, I think that there's some audio problems. Can you hear me? Can you mute probably for a while your microphone, and we can solve probably that, and we move to Chef?
Well, in our opinion, we think Latin America will be hit very badly. Mainly our view on this is because of the lack of GDP percentage-wise investments from the local governments to counter the effects of the crisis. What you are seeing is that a lot of governments, well, especially Mexico being a large one, governments is taking no actions whatsoever to actually counter the V curve, which is happening actually after each crisis. So where we have a strong downwards trend, and afterwards a very quick ramping up. And the best way to constrain this is, of course, by more governmental help. We have seen this in the last crisis with Japan. Anyway, on top of that, of course, Latin America is heavily depending on tourism, and Mexico specifically is heavily depending on the trade with the US. Of course, the trade in the US is in slowdown. This will lead to reductions for trade with Mexico. Tourism goes down. The whole trade via the Panama Canal is being affected. So yeah, generally, if you ask me which flows are going to be affected, well, we see also the food chain in the US. We have, there was an interesting podcast of one of the guys in this is from where we saw that the immigrants, of course, who help in getting all the products of the fields, well, obviously that is down, so there will be less supply, and that could, of course, also cause that products are not widely available anymore. So cargo streams which are currently affected, that was part of the question, is high volume with high volume trading goods with small margins in the import side. Why have they been affected? Because of the exchange rate, so it's become too expensive to sell them. The raw materials from Europe to Mexico have been affected. So Mexico heavily depends on car exports, around 4 million cars a year. So that will be quite affected. And worldwide, what we still have to see here, but we already see in the US, well, actually we saw it in Europe. When I left Europe on the 6th of March, we saw already that there was an equipment shortage for export. So we cannot get the export out, even though there is demand, because of the lack of equipment from China. This will happen, of course, with a delay also at this side of the world. We already see it in the US. There is not enough empty equipment to get the exports out. Mexico, it's still, so it's a little bit okay, but of course we also will be hit with that because most of the voyages are connected with the US. So yeah, we expect that to happen more or less at the end of April, beginning of May. So that would be my answer, which is more or less also in line with what Anna had to say.
Okay, thank you very much, Chef. Let's try with Enrique. I think now you are okay, Enrique?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect, clear.
Thank you. Sorry to everyone, hi again. Well, about our perception, until now we've seen struggling more Europe region than any other, and in supply chain industry is not an exemption in this contingency. even that logistics and transport activities have been considered as essential businesses, but it is applied mainly those focused in food and medical supplies or equipment. So for all other commodities or businesses not considered as essential or not going on normal operation, our industry has been affected too. As Moody's mentioned in a report last week, the shipping sector is dependent on world trade and activity demand for goods from industrial companies as well as consumers. Regarding transport costs, as Ben mentioned previously, and also applies to Europe region, the rates to Europe are between 2 times to 4 times higher than normal, as the industry are dealing with the swift suspensions of almost all passengers' schedules. And well, several air shipments are loaded in these passenger flights. And this is the situation today in Europe as we see it, as I said, as our perception. But also events are occurring every day and information is changing practically every hour. Here in the Americas, we are just starting, just to see the consequences of COVID contingency. Therefore, there's still uncertainty in our region of how it will be affected. Regarding our products, we handle mainly automotive parts, for example, electric engines for trains, concrete, construction materials, measurement equipment. Our perception is that shipments or projects are on hold mainly due to speculations or uncertainty of the current situation, as not all factories from our clients have not stopped in total their operations. They're still moving some products or commodities, doing some shipments in a lower level, obviously, with all the cautions and restrictions due to this emergency. That's our perception as Boyke Logistics.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Then I would like to pass to the other question. Actually, that's something also Ben was saying about the demand and availability of products. So the biggest economies concerns are the weakness in demand and availability of raw materials. Now availability in China, as Ben was saying, is slowly getting to normal. So the key concern is how to get demand back to the pre-crisis levels. How and when do you think this will happen? I know it's a difficult question, but what do you see from your side? This question goes to Buki and to Rotra. Can we start with Chef?
Okay, well, what we think is that normally a country can boost, of course, the demand by governmental projects, by large infrastructural projects like airports, roads, where the government already can invest and put a lot of people to work. A lot of people to work means more money so they can spend. However, the current projects in Mexico, well, we all know the construction of a second airport and the Maya train especially. It's difficult to incentivize or to make money out of a Maya train on a commercial site, but this yet has to be seen. Lower interest rates, well, that's what a government can do. This has been the game, of course, for a long time in Europe, actually leading to negative interest rates even before the Corona crisis. Mexico has done this recently, lowering well, 5 points the interest rates. This should lead to more consumption, but of course, what you will see at the other side is that actually the the consumers, they will not start spending now, because typical behavior is that they will start saving, and this will mean there will be less circulation of money, and this will affect all the industries. So what the government should do is to counter, of course, and to prevent mass layoff, as we have seen already in the US. The unemployment applications jumped till believe 7 million somewhere last week. So definitely Mexico in the formal industry, because more or less half of the population is not even formally employed, we will see that there will be layoffs where there used to be certain help for people like the Afore, which could be used to bridge a couple of months of not having money. That currently has been blocked. So even people who are fired cannot even use the Afore anymore in Mexico. Well, as we all know, there is no help, so that will be a little bit of a problem. If you look at international operating companies, I think at the end of the day, especially if you're a local company operating here in Mexico versus competing versus an international operating company, it will become more and more difficult. Why? Well, it's very simple. If I have to compete with a company who is operating out of Holland, for instance, if you have a loss of 20% of turnover, the government jumps in and takes over 90% of your expenses on human resources. And over here, if we lose 20%, well, you lost 20%, and you have to see how you survive. So, and again, what I just also mentioned, what else can the government to boost the demand? Of course, to quickly counteract the V trend, which is currently existing, you know. So the bigger the impact, normally other countries we have seen, the bigger the help from the governments. That's why also the European community has freed up a big plan of 750 billion to help the economy boost. These funds, compared with the 2008 crisis, were far more quicker released, also in the US. I don't know exactly how many trillion has been released. That is the way to counter the big impact. Of course, we will see the absence of raw materials. This will affect, as we just heard from other speakers. The recovery will be very erratic. This will mean go up, again down, go up, go down. Of course, the trend line will still go up, but each time you will see hiccups in the supply chain. Why? Because there's lack of equipment, but even more important, there's a lack of cash. I think most of the companies, it's not if they are profitable or not profitable on the fiscal side. Most of them, they are fighting with liquidity problems. And if they have, if that continues, well, that's the biggest threat, I think, for the flow of raw materials. And most of the importers, and that's my last comment on this topic, is they don't know actually who are their actual suppliers, because at the end of the day, it's a pyramid. So the final product exists out of several components. So therefore you have several suppliers. So if you think you are sourcing a product, it could be that your whole supply chain is affected because one of the crucial parts to make the end product is not available. So yeah, these are, I think, in general lines, what basically will happen, you know, on a big macro scale, but also on the raw material side.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff. There's a question that I will try to put it in the next question. Probably this is about Incoterms, so we will answer that question later. Enrique, can you please help us with also this question?
Sure. Well, it's difficult, as you mentioned now previously, the question to define a period when demand will be back to pre-crisis levels, because we know so far that until now China is slowly getting back to normal, but all regions are still just starting contingency actions. For instance, large container volumes as a result of reopening in China after their extended shutdown are expected to arrive in North America over the next month. And this surely will cause strain and pressure on storage capacities, given to the inability to move volume out of these storages to retail stores or factories that are closed as the result of the shutdown in North America now. For example, also shipping line 1, Ocean Network Express, the complete name, are saying that big retailers now are negotiating up to 30% more space on ships over the next 3 months. So once major industries are reopened after shutdown, we will face a congestion or lack of space for their shipments. So I think for now, for shippers or suppliers, it is very important to be close contact with their buyers or clients in order to take action. I think it's important to plan their supply chain requirements properly in order to avoid delayed shipments and looking to get demand back to pre-crisis levels. No? So there's some recommendations. I found something important from McKinsey Company of a complete short-term response and some actions that could be taken into account. For example, to create transparency on multi-tier supply chains, establishing a list of critical components, determining the origin of supply, and identifying alternative sources. No, I think this is related. Of Jeff also commented about to check the source of supplies. No, also to estimate available inventory along the value chain, including the spare parts and after-sales stock, for use as a bridge to keep production running and enable delivery to customers. Identify and secure logistics capacity, estimating capacity and accelerating where possible, and being flexible on transportation mode when required. If it has to change from air freight to sea freight to air freight, FCL, LCL, etc. Also manage cash and net working capital by running a stress test in order to understand where supply chain issues will start to cause financial impact. So I think mainly is by now to take action, especially to plan and to be in close contact with all the parts involved in the supply chain areas.
Great, thank you very much, Enrique. And also, actually, well, I understand you're one of your main clients or your main scope in what you do is the automotive sector. So this next question goes especially to you. And is the automotive sector in Mexico represents 2.9% of GDP and around 1 million jobs. Many believe this sector to have great potential, moving manufacturing out of China and into Mexico, primarily for the US market. Since the sector has been deemed not essential, industry operation has been suspended. What is your outlook on this situation? Do you see any role from the government? Probably something we all want to know and understand as this industry is being very hardly affected.
Sure. Well, in terms of production during March of this year, compared with same month of 2019, companies like General Motors, Nissan, Fiat, Chrysler, Ford, Volkswagen had a fall between 14 up to 46%. Only companies like Kia and Mazda had positive results, increasing 11 and 15% respectively in their production. In terms of exports, in this year Mexico, the automobiles export descended almost 12% with respect of the same period of last year. No, this is according to INEGI, which is the National Institute of Statistics and Geography in Mexico. And for example, big companies installed in Mexican territory already have reflected this fall. General Motors, Fiat, and Nissan in Aguascalientes, all of them have a drop in their exports operations between the less 3 to 4% up to 37%. And these three brands, General Motors, Fiat, and Nissan, represent 54% of total exported automobile during March of this year. Other companies like Ford, Audi in Puebla, Honda, Toyota had also a fall in this third month of the year, and only 3 companies had an increase in their exports this year or this same month compared with 2019, such as Volkswagen, Kia, and Mazda are the only companies that had an increase between 7 and, well, Mazda had an increase of 71%. For Q1 of this year, Mexico had a fall of 6.9% in automobile exports globally. But in the terms of export markets, US currently is a big market for Mexico. According to AMIA, the Automotive Industry Mexican Association, volume of automobiles manufactured in Mexico has lowered their operation to main countries of destination. By now, US is the major receiver of Mexican units. They showed a drop of 5.8% during first quarter of this year compared to 2019. Canada is the second major destination and also had a drop of almost 10%. And the third main destination is Germany with 3.8% less than Q1 of 2019. And these 3 countries only represent almost 90% of automobiles exports of Mexico to the world. So indeed, Mexico could cover more manufacturing in automotive industry to the US, especially in the terms to exchange China providers or suppliers to the US. But it is also important to consider that Mexican associations requested to the government to postpone the effective date of TMEC or USMCA in the United States, which is the new NAFTA, which is programmed to by June the 1st of this year. And these associations argument that they have not cleared the uniform regulations that they will have to follow in accordance to regional content that has to be considered in an automobile provided in any country of the zone. So it may cause difficult to these exports may be affected in case these regulations are not clear, as US or Canada may not accept automobiles produced in Mexico if they don't fulfill these regulations. Now, regarding the government role, well, industries aren't relying now on government to face this crisis. No, an industry in automotive industry is not an exemption. For example, the association related to the automotive just regretted expressly via Twitter to the president didn't recognize the gravity of current crisis in his last statement on Sunday. So therefore, no actions or plans are expected for automotive industry, and they are considering to act on their own.
Great, thank you very much, Enrique. Actually, we just received a message from Andres Manning saying about the new State Regulatory Commission and this new document that is published today. So it will be very interesting. He just sent us a link about this Diario Oficial de la Federación, new regulations. So it will be very interesting to take a look at that information. Thank you, Andres, also. Thank you, Enrique. Well, we will pass to the next question. This goes for Anna from Action. As Anna, you are more involved in the food industry. As essential industry that is considered, the food industry is supposed to operate without restrictions. What are the main opportunities and obstacles the industry is facing during this crisis? This goes for Anna and also for Rotra. Can we start with Anna, please?
Sure. Okay, for me, I think three important things. For sure is supply chain. If the business is based on products, ingredients, or supplies from international markets, it can be affected by suppliers, workers, and logistics networks. For example, talking about restaurants and factories that face a multitude of unprecedented challenge. The coronavirus containment efforts hinder factories' efforts to reopen. This can cause shortage in the food industry and sourcing for unreliable locations. That could be a really huge problem for another markets, I think. And in my own experience, I think FDA or Global Gap and another seals of this kind that certify good practices and food heat handling, given that it has not been ruled out that the virus passed from a possible animal to in this case, the man. It can be complicated from the producer, discouraging and hindering the commercialization and promoting the scarcity. I think it could be a really huge problem, and therefore the price can be on the rise. And it's a problem for me, I think, because we already have this recurring economic circle every day. So for me, it's a huge question that is surrounding all the days in our business. And this last thought is, for example, it could be a disadvantage or it could be not, but it depends on the government. Talking about Mexico, as Jeff said, government of economies in recession, Mexico is one of those, does not respond adequately to create a bailout from companies that are being disruptive. For example, e-commerce, companies that are trying to make a huge effort to help supply chain and create more efficient and different supply chains than what we are used to. I think it could be a disadvantage if the government does not help or is not at the level, or it could be a good way if they notice that it could be a good advantage for the country. Talking about e-commerce, I think is a cutting edge and bring market closer. So I think that could be a disadvantage or a main opportunity for, it depends the country and it depends the economy, but that's my thought to our main concern, that is Mexico.
Thank you very much, Anna. And Chef, please.
Well, again, what are the main obstacles for the food industry? For, as I just mentioned already, I think there will be a lack of, or at least a reduction of food supplies in the US due to the absence of labor force. And it is projected that more or less 27% are immigrants. So, I mean, you cannot get the food off the fields, then there will be a shortage. Of course, the advantage on the other side is the weak peso right now. I mean, we lost, I think, more or less 30% in a very short time. That means all the products are for export, not only food products are becoming cheaper. So yes, definitely, this opens up more opportunities, perhaps not in the coming 2 months because everybody is still seeing what's going to happen. But I mean, as I mentioned before, it's a V trend, so whatever goes down has to go up again. What I could generally say about the topic is that I think the best way forward, if you are in this business, is look at what happened after other big global epidemics like H1N1. What happened in the market? How quickly did it recover? I think it's very important that you have close contact with your supplier and check his inventory so you don't run out of raw materials. Depending on the ramping up, I mean, to prepare for the ramping up, because it will go up. I mean, if you because of financial issues, you start reducing your inventory right now, you will lose when the ramping up is happening. And so yeah, also there, I mean, the advice would be, I mean, look at the accumulation of inventory, and I would say also be prepared for a little bit of social discomfort, because there will definitely be interruptions in the supply chain, and this will lead to panic actions by the population. And of course, that's what I said before. I mean, this will show a very erratic development of the trend line. I mean, going up but also falling down. So the V curve repeats itself in an upgoing trend. So yeah, and I mean, for all the companies, the best advice I can give, especially in Mexico, make sure you have a good team, make sure you have good interaction with your team. And yeah, especially now there's a crisis time, we are already seeing that companies start to help, between each other. I think open communication is very important. Don't hide. And yeah, I think it's a matter of a couple of months. And I mean, as somebody mentioned in the newspaper, I mean, the Corona crisis will continue as long as there is no vaccine. And this is not to be expected in the next year or next 1.5 years or something like that. So we will all get infected, and this will keep on putting pressure on the social system of each country. And if you are not really prepared for that, I mean, this will put quite, this will be quite a challenge, I think, also for Mexico in this respect. Yeah. So
yes. Sure. Yes, thank you very much. I'll try to move a little bit fast with the next questions, just to cover all. And the next question is for you, Anna, also. Tell us a little bit about this project you are working at. You are involved in a project, a short-term maritime route, Mexico to the Netherlands, for products including mangoes, limes, avocados. It was supposed to start this month, this project. So is that suffering any change with the timing? Tell us a bit more about this new route and the outlook for the next month. Please, let's try to do it in a couple of minutes.
Sure. Yeah, well, what a year, right? It's supposed that it will be starting right now in April. But yeah, to validate our proposal and subsequently guarantee the journey, we have developed a project in 2 phases. We will work with several shipping companies at the beginning, where we agreed a journey no more than 19 days by sea and competitive rates. In the same way, for shorten their journey from orchard to destination port here in Mexico. And then we'll be cutting the journey time as well. And the time we release from orchard to destination port in Mexico. And it has to be most effective and smooth as possible for our clients. We have 2 clients, 2 consumers, the orchard, the producer, and then the importer, in this case in Europe. We want to think that delayed us a little bit. We are having a huge effort to continue develop this challenge, since we must be sure that the chain is complete and working fully. We need to have these 2 scenarios very clear. And yeah, just to be a little more info, we are talking about around 200 containers per week, different fruits from Mexico and mainly to north of Europe, and between 4,000 pallets under deck. So yeah, that will be a phase 2. And it would be, we are thinking we can arrange this to August. It has to be this year, so be sure that we need to complete this challenge for August. And only fresh fruits and another perishables that can be in our own basil, manage our own basil, I mean.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. We hope so also.
Yes.
Well, yes, moving to next question. This is for Buki and Rotra. In terms of pricing, what is the impact of Corona crisis on your clients, exporters and importers? Talking about probably the logistic operation that is also being affected. And is there any suggestion like Incoterm negotiation, not negotiating probably in FOB, but other kind of negotiation? Any suggestion from your side? Let's start with Buki.
Thank you. Well, as the International Commerce Center explains, and I will try to be short, the Incoterms are used to facilitate international trade, not to increase it. So this decision is mainly taken by buyer and the consignee or the importer. So the role of the Incoterms is to be clear, no, what is involved in each part, in the terms of risk, damages, loss, responsibility, delivery, costs of the commodity, as it is transported from an origin point to its final destination. According to the current situation, there are like several applications of each Incoterm. For example, for X-Works, FCA or FOB, free on board or free carrier Incoterms, where a seller delivered the goods in a nominated point without shipping costs. The buyer is on risk from that point, that nominated point where the seller delivered the goods. So in that case, the seller has no responsibilities anymore, instead of delivering the product only. So in terms of the current situation of COVID, the buyer on the other side is unlikely to rely upon force majeure remedies only, as this contingency is not preventing the parties from fulfilling their obligations to each other. On the other side, in case of DDP, delivery duty paid, seller is responsible of almost everything, to delivery of the goods, the shipping coordination, the insurance in case, the duties up to delivery point dominated. In the risk of not being able to deliver goods due to COVID-19 restrictions, this will sit to the seller, these risks. So as this will directly impact the ability of the seller to perform contractual obligations, the seller is more likely to seek rely upon force majeure clause, or argue that the contract is terminated by frustration, as they have to bear the risk of non-delivery. So this case in DDP. For C Incoterms like CPT, CIP, CFR, CIF, there is like more complex information, as risks and costs are transferred in different places. For example, with CPT, the seller delivered the goods to the carrier at an agreed place, and the seller must contract for and pay the cost of carriage necessary to bring the goods to the named or place of destination. So importantly, the seller fulfills its obligations once it hands the goods over to the carrier, and not when they reach the place of destination. So what happens if the destination country imposes restrictions on a vessel arriving from the country of origin? The seller has passed the risks from delivery onto carrier vessel in the shipment. So as with DDP, there may be a little or no contractual remedy available to the buyer, as the seller has already performed their obligations.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, CIP, Incoterm, essentially mirrors CPT, but with the addition of the seller having to obtain insurance of the goods. against the buyer's risk of loss or damage to the goods during the carriage. This only has to be a minimum cover. Whether this covers COVID-19, it will depend on the precise terms of the insurance policy obtained. So what to do now is, well, due to the uncertainty of the long-term effects of COVID-19, especially on cross-border supply chains across different commodities, it's important that to review your supply chain as buyer or seller, your supply contracts, to properly consider your position in mitigating commercial risk and losses. So it's important understanding that any Incoterms incorporated in these negotiations as a first step on deciding how to deal with any supply contracts.
Okay, thank you very much, Enrique. Chef, what is your opinion about pricing for your clients, and also is there any suggestion for them about negotiations?
Well, again, I mean, the crisis impact on terms of pricing, I mean, you will know again, imports will be reduced because the peso, the import goods are becoming more expensive. And also a lot of importers have reduced, even the ones who have regular high imports. Think customers which move, I don't know, 4,000 containers a year with us. In the import side here in Mexico, they've reduced their inventory because not only because of the demand, they also expect a lot of disruption in the ports and the customs and stuff like that. I mean, even now you would expect actually from a government not to close customs because you want trade keeping going on. But what do we see, especially with Thursday, well, tomorrow and Friday, again, customs only working until 3 o'clock. Of course, another disruption in the supply chain, which is completely unnecessary, but this completely aside. As with regards to the Incoterm, what I would suggest, at the end of the day, everybody needs money right now, okay? So apart from what Enrique has just mentioned, if you start buying right now on CIF or CFR, that means that normally, generally speaking, you will have to pay the goods either by letter of credit or upon arrival or something like that, but at least you will have not that very flexible payment conditions with your supplier, because also the supplier, he pays the freight for you. So out of a forwarder's perspective, my advice would be to those customers who have a good relationship with their forwarder, go and talk with your forwarder, and we see it, that's how we do it. I mean, change the Incoterm from CIF with insurance or CFR without insurance, and change it to FOB or even Ex-Works. Tell your forwarder to finance it based on ETA plus whatever credit term. This will give you more liquidity in your company. Instead of paying all your goods and freight up front, at least you pay the goods up front, but your freight you can put on a credit, so there you could get some leverage. And I don't think immediately this would affect your merchant's point of view or settlement cases. At the end of the day, the Incoterms are quite clear on how to proceed on that. Of course, you see also a lot of people now claiming under the cause of the COVID virus in compliance. Of course, has nothing to do with it. I mean, even in the freight forwarder worlds, we have a big organization which is called the WCA, where we already see that the default payments between partners have gone up already 20%, but even there are a lot of partners claiming invoices from last year and using the COVID excuse to not pay it. So having said this, for the Incoterms, yeah, change it to FOB or Ex-Works, guys, and ask your forwarder to help you out with some kind of credit term, so you can you have more liquidity at the end.
Great, Chef. Very, very good opinion also. Thank you very much. Moving to the last question, it's more about what you see for the future, and also every crisis gives us opportunities. How do you see supply chain management shape in the coming years? Are there any opportunities for COVID-19 is bringing to the table? What new technologies, for example, blockchain, do you think will be implemented? We understand blockchain is also now being used. Will be probably that an opportunity being probably accelerated? I don't know. I would like to hear all of you. Very short opinion. couple of minutes also, or 3 minutes, just to have an opinion. Let's start also with Anna, please.
Sure. Well, of course, logistics, as we know, it is not that it's about to disappear, but it will undergo important changes. You have to be at the forefront in terms of platforms that allow you to bring markets and commercial products closer to places that perhaps did not arrive before. Talking about blockchain, as you said, Jamil, is very important because it works with product traceability is an added value that must be considered because we understand that, sorry, mom problem, that we consider, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry about that, because we understand that it could be create a cyclical economy and talking about best practices and understand new business structures, baby please, structures to reactive sectors such as agriculture that we are mainly making huge efforts to develop it, which is always a potential winner in any crisis. I think betting and investing in food is always the future. So yeah, this crisis for the world is a huge opportunity to develop and go to the next level, talking about logistics.
Okay, thank you very much, Ana. Enrique, you have a couple of minutes.
Well, also we've seen now with this situation and with this emergency, a lot of companies or small companies that are just as startups or not big companies are implementing the selling online, no? So one of the main opportunities which are currently adapting a lot of businesses is this part. I think this will be like, well, it has to be already essential almost in every business, but already a lot of companies are implementing or developing more about their online selling. But also the as also Jeff previously commented, I think the supply network mapping is important in order to have a response of this, for example, this kind of disruption. Until now, almost all companies have been reactive or uncoordinated in the impact of the crisis. A small number of companies have invested in mapping their supply networks, even before the pandemic, and even that, and there have been numerous of events such as earthquakes, tsunamis, floods in Asia, hurricanes. Most of companies still found unprepared for the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it's necessary and is an opportunity for some companies to invest in this mapping. For also a lot of consignees or buyers were still were struggling to check even where their supplies were located in China when the pandemic started in that region. So buyers are not even certain about their suppliers' information in China especially. So many companies and leaders also are talking about needing of supply network mapping, as risk mitigation strategy. But some have not done it because of the perceived large amount of labor and time required. As I said, we see this as an opportunity with new breed of services companies that already are helping to acquire in order to analyze supply network data and organize results in a user-friendly way. A few of these companies are like Elementum, Yamasoft, and Rollisync. So also Harvard Business Review stated that after COVID-19 crisis dissipates, we will see companies fall into one of two categories. There will be those that doesn't do anything, hoping that such a disruption won't ever happen again. These companies will be taking a highly risky gamble, and there will be firms that learn the lessons of this crisis and make investments in mapping their supply networks, so they do not have to operate blind when the next crisis strikes, and rewrite their contracts so they can quickly figure out solutions when disruptions occur. These companies will be the winners in the long term.
Great, Enrique, thank you very much. Chef?
Well, again, I think if you talk about the landscape of supply chain management, to answer your question on the blockchain, I don't think that has a lot of effect. Blockchain is merely a technology to make sure that the information is not manipulated from going from between parties. But the digitalization of the business, for sure, any service, whatever service in the world will be digitalized, whether it's hotel service, whether it's the logistics service, or as we have seen with the taxi service, everything will be digitalized, and either you go along with it or you won't survive. How the supply chain will affect, I think, of course, there is a lot of pressure on the financial side. Airlines are struggling, big forwarders are struggling, carriers are struggling. So yes, what I expect is that they will not be able to, on the long run, to keep on doing this, or to keep on going on with their business. So I think there will be more takeovers between carriers and large forwarders and airlines, like we also saw in the past. So less carriers, and small local forwarders will have more difficulties to survive against the big ones. I already mentioned because of the governmental aid, which is different between countries. But apart from that, I mean, you have to vastly invest in IT budgets and to keep up with the digitalization of the service. And you need, of course, the financial strength to pull this in. That's, if you look at budgets which are spent on companies, on the big freight forwarders, it's brutal. So, I mean, integration, you need to look for integration. So you need to have your own software. You need to have your own IT department. You need to be integrated, to be able to integrate with ERP systems. We already do this, as I mentioned in my presentation. I mean, Rotra is one of the top 5 digital forwarders right now in Europe, where we do ERP integration, where we have our own APIs to integrate with third parties. Everything is already digitalized on our side. So, I mean, and that's where you also see what will come. I mean, other forwarders will for sure follow us. And yeah, I think what in Mexico will change, typically, I think Anna and Enrique will agree with me there. If we go out there and we visit the customer normally sees us as another supplier and say, hey, you are a freight forwarder, how much is it going to cost? And can you move my cargo? I think, and I hope that truly this crisis and this will help our customers understand that actually the freight forwarder is a part of their supply chain and not merely a supplier, that the client starts seeing that we actually can help them make their sales more efficient, and actually they should invite us. This trend in Europe has already started, where you have more on the control tower side, okay, where, for instance, we actively monitor all the savings together with the client. So we are not anymore the traditional freight forwarder offering, I don't know, to say something, okay, how much do you have? Well, we are paying 1,000 right now. Okay, let me give you 900. No, we don't do that anymore. We actually are involved more in looking and sitting down together with the customer. Okay, you have a supply chain. Where are the potential savings, and how can we make sure you have more visibility on your whole supply chain? So digitalization and tools like blockchain can help. So, but cloud solutions, of course, are very important. That especially now with home office, as we are seeing, that the customers have access to the paperwork. I mean, some of the forwarders like us, we already have that since 4 or 5 years ago, but other ones will definitely follow. And yeah, I mean, this will put, again, a big pressure on their budgets, especially on the IT side. So that's how I see, or we see, that supply chain will change in the coming years. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And yes, it's true. Everyone needs to be into technology. If not, we're out of the business. Probably they will accelerate a little bit more that all the IT developments that the companies are doing right now. So yes, we just finished with a question. Thank you, everyone. I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat. I think there are not. With all this information you already gave us, we understand the world is suffering changes every day. So we all need to be aware of what is going on in terms of government, in terms of companies. Products also are suffering changes. It's not the same for all the products, as Ben said before. So yes, probably this will represent a big
Unfortunately, I believe that we lost Yamil there. Hopefully he'll be able to come back to us before much time. He's had some problems with his connection during the webinar in general. Well, in this case, I would like to thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry for a little bit of delay that we had during this presentation. There is evidently a lot to say on the topic. I would like to thank all of the people who helped us with presentations today. Ben from China, who I think is already ready to go to bed now. Also thank you to Ana Cecilia, to Enrique, and to Chef. Thank you to Yamil. Thank you all for joining us today. The idea was to have a little bit of extra time for virtual networking, but I realized that we've gone a little bit over the time limit. If you can stay, then you are more than welcome to. And otherwise, I would like to thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you.